Welcome to the Values Exchange podcast. I'm Mike Cruz, your host, author of Saturday Every Day, private pilot, and CEO of North Texas Wealth Management, a firm dedicated to values-based financial planning. All right, I'm thrilled to be here with our guest today, Congressman Keith Self. So many accomplishments, attending West Point, and awards as, Army and retiring as a lieutenant colonel, including the Airborne Infantry Platoon Leader, Airborne Infantry Company Commander, Special Forces Detachment Commander, Special Forces Company Commander, traveling all over with the military, Grenada, Bosnia, Afghanistan, and including Iraqi freedom. Also, the awards as a Master Parachute Badge, a Ranger Tab, Special Forces Tab, Joint Staff Badge, numerous accomplishments. What a unique journey. Congressman, thanks for being here with me.
Great to be here, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I noticed, the first thing I noticed was, all this travel. I think your, father was also in the Army. You were born in an Army hospital, but most importantly, you were raised in Texas.
I was born in a naval hospital.
Okay.
While he was on active duty, but I got to Texas 5 weeks later.
All right.
So, 5 weeks, I think I get some grace on. So yes, I was raised in Texas, early days in Fort Worth. We did spend a few years out of Texas, but most of my time was in Amarillo. So that's where I graduated from high school. I'm a proud Tascosa rebel.
All right.
And before I went to West Point.
Very good. What was your experience when you went to West Point? What was that like?
Well, I wasn't going to West Point initially. I was going to go to Texas A&M and be a large animal veterinarian.
Okay.
But my brother went to West Point 2 years ahead of me. He didn't like it. But he came home and he would say, you got to march and you got to shoot and you got to play sports and you got to study and there's discipline. And I was just like, wow, really? So I applied to go to West Point and there I was. So it was a great experience for me after you get through that plebe year, of course. And it was the place to go. I actually went to airborne school and ranger school while I was a cadet at West Point. So by the time I graduated from West Point, I was an airborne ranger already. So I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to carry a rucksack and jump out of airplanes, and so that was at West Point. I decided to do that.
All right. Well, I haven't done that. So what's it like the very first time you jump out of that plane?
The first time is like any other experience. You don't know what to expect. It's the second jump when your eyes are closed.
All right.
So, but no, it's. I tell people that jumping out of an airplane is more fun than the law allows. It just is. It's a tremendous. I'll go ahead and say it. Some people say it's the most fun you can have with your clothes on.
Right.
So it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, that's good. So, I think ultimately, the values exchange, I like to bring out the most important values that have kind of shaped you. And of course, you have this experience with, West Point and strong values there. And then the military itself. Are there any values that you would say have really just shaped your life?
Well, it starts with my family. My parents on each side were the first ones to go to college. And I was raised in a Baptist church, so my foundation was set early. But I was actually discipled at West Point by two active duty professors, John George and Al Shine. And so, as you know, the motto of West Point is duty, honor, country. Mm-hmm. And those are the values that West Point instilled in me. I'm not perfect, but the foundation is there. So from an early day, and then when you lead men, you discover real quickly what a good leader is. Now, anybody can be a leader, good leader, bad leader. If you have followers, you're a leader. Mm-hmm. But being a good leader is something that takes not only the foundation but practice, frankly.
Mm-hmm. So, when you say good leader, what do you feel like that is? What distinguishes a good leader?
One that really does value. In the Army, we term it mission and men. You must accomplish your mission, but you're not going to sacrifice your men to accomplish the mission. So it is a balance that a good leader is able to achieve between mission and men.
Yeah. Can you think back at maybe a turning point when you were becoming a leader that
I will tell you one example of that was meaningful to me. It was a jump into a small DZ with my Special Forces detachment. I commanded a nuclear detachment, so we carried around a little suitcase nuke, is what they refer to them as. I was the jump master, and we were doing a tailgate jump out the back of the plane, not out the door. So the jump master goes first. So we were all very heavily loaded because one man has the bomb. That's all he has. So everybody else carries part of his equipment. So I had a 91-pound rucksack in front of me. I had another 20 pounds of web gear hanging on me. And my rifle, of course, was in a case. So I was over the weight for the parachute in any case. And I was looking out the back, but I was too heavily loaded to even look around and see where we were going. It looked like we were low. So I kept talking to the Air Force loadmaster that I think we're low. And he kept assuring me it would be okay. So when the green light came on, just before the green light came on, I looked back at my detachment. This is my detachment. And every man was looking at me, and it was just like, regardless of what happens out there, we're following you out this door. That's what you need as a leader. The men to say, regardless of what happens, we're going with you. And we went out, and we were at probably no more than 300 feet, because I swung once, saw that the bomb's chute was good, and I was in the trees. So
wow.
We weren't anywhere close to the drop zone. So it's moments like that that are really important to you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great story. Just knowing they're with you.
Yeah, and you can tell. Let's go out. Let's go off this ramp together.
Yeah. So what kind of advice would you give to new leaders in business? So you've seen kind of all angles, and you and I met at a business meeting, and I really appreciate you being there. It was like 20 business, entrepreneurs, owners, and you were listening, and it was evident that you were there for the right reasons, and I really appreciate that. And so when you're talking to business leaders, and maybe they're new leaders, what type of advice would you have, kind of based on that military experience?
Well, what values are you going to exhibit? Because greed is a human element, emotion. So it's not dissimilar to mission and men. You need to earn a living, make money, but are you going to do it at the expense of, say, your family or the things that you value? So you really, and again, I think that's a learned trait. The argument over whether a leader is made or born is age old. But I think that regardless of how you fall on that argument, you can improve your leadership.
Yeah.
And I think you do over time.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I like that a lot. So you made this journey from military and then later became a judge. So why did you decide to go that route? And then what would you say from your military experience really helped you or assisted you in that transition?
It's a good question. First of all, I was the county judge, so
Okay.
I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
And I don't profess to be a lawyer. Don't want to be a lawyer. So the county judge presides over the commissioner's court, which sets the county tax rate, builds roads, funds the retirement system, and funds all of the elected offices. Now, the commissioner's court does that. So I think probably the things that I brought with me from the military were I didn't spend a majority of my career in command positions. Most of it, over a 25-year career, was in staff positions, where you really don't have a lot of authority, but you better have some influence, or you're not going to be worth much. As the county judge, you have very little direct personal authority. So you better have influence over the commissioner's court, of course, and over the elected officials, and you better stay close to the people if you want to be reelected. So It's more of an influence position than
Okay.
a direct authority position. So I think that's what I would say is you have to understand the difference, because a lot of people think that you come out of the military, you're used to giving orders. Well, some people like
Mhm.
that sort of a leadership, but it doesn't work often, and certainly not in an influence position like the county judge.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you think back maybe to military experience, the importance of having influence, was there a time where you felt like you were able to influence something, make a big impact that you look back and are pretty proud of?
Yeah, there would be several, but um, um, not ones that we'll cover here,
Okay.
because those tend to be the times that um, are not fun.
Not fun. Yeah. Yeah. And what about as a county judge?
Well, I think the two things that we talk about all the time are, first of all, we reduced the county tax rate by almost 30%,
Hmm.
and I'm talking about the tax rate by 30%.
Wow.
People talk all the time about reducing your taxes, but your taxes are going up, and people wonder why. Well, they say they've reduced the spending, so it's not really a reduction in the tax rate.
Hmm.
And we funded the explosive growth in Collin County basically from new construction. The other thing is that we were woefully behind in our funding our retirement system when I took office. And people don't understand the complexity of the TCDRS, Texas County District Retirement System. Because if you're behind, the system is charging you 7% plus. In our case, it was 9% interest on the payments that you were behind.
Oh, wow.
So we were earning at the time 2%, 3%. We were paying 9%. It made no sense. So we fully funded the retirement system, and it was more than that, but over a 3-year period, that was $55 million.
Wow.
And Collin County was a lot smaller at that time, so it was a larger chunk. So fixing that issue was big for the county, because debt, which I'm finding out now at the national level, debt is a killer. So debt, paying 9% on debt when you're making 2% on huge reserves, we had large reserves, makes no financial sense.
Sure.
So those are the things that I would mention.
Yeah. So as a congressman now and looking at debt at the federal level, how concerned are you? What type of influence are you trying to have there?
There are two major issues for me: debt and the southern border.
Okay.
Let's start with debt, because we are now almost $35 trillion in debt. That's just federal debt.
Mm-hmm.
When you take in state and local debt, it's unbelievable how much debt is out there. But let's focus on the federal debt. We are now borrowing $1 trillion every 100 days.
Wow.
More than $3 trillion in a year. We're now paying more money on the interest alone on the national debt than we're paying on the whole Defense Department.
Yeah.
It's an astounding figure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's projected to go to perhaps 50 trillion. That is absolutely unsustainable, because remember, most of our federal budget is on autopilot, known as mandatory spending. Those are the Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid.
Sure.
So we only deal with, people argue over the percentage, we only deal in Congress, approve like 17% of the budget at the most. So we don't even have a lot to say over most of the budget. And that's the drivers. The driver today is healthcare, frankly.
Yeah, Medicare.
The biggest driver.
Yeah. So when you say, you're really only deciding about 17% of the budget, what do you think is there a solution? What do you think that solution looks like?
Well, it's going to be a combination of growth. We've got to get back to pro-growth policies. We do not have pro-growth policies today in the federal government. We've got to get back to pro-growth policies, but we also have to slow down the growth of the debt through cutting spending. There are estimates that we could probably cut out 10% without blinking an eye.
Sure.
But remember, Ronald Reagan said, the closest thing to eternal life on earth is a government program. Now, why is that? Because every program has a constituency. Someone is benefiting from it.
Yeah.
So as soon as you either try to cut or eliminate a program, you hear from the constituency, whoever that is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the programs are they're hard to cut.
Sure.
Because somebody's going to come talk to you if you try to do that. But we've got to find cuts. We've got to, even if it's, and here's a staggering fact for you: 1,100 programs in the federal government are not authorized. You authorize a program, and then you appropriate money against it. The authorizing committees, those committees that you would think of, in the have never or haven't for a long time even authorized these programs. Yet the appropriators throw money at it.
Wow.
So that's one solution, that we need to make sure that every program is authorized. But we've got to find cuts, and we've got to get back to pro-growth policies.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of the pro-growth policies that will expire at the end of this year. 2025, if we don't do something in Congress to reestablish the pro-growth policies from 2017, we're going to see a huge increase in taxes.
Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah. And looking back to maybe your military days, now when we talk about everything going on in the world and foreign policy, how has that shaped kind of how you think of foreign policy?
Well, excuse me, I spent well over a decade as a military planner. I was stationed overseas 10 years. Only one of those assignments was a tactical assignment with the Special Forces Battalion. The rest was in planning capacities in the embassy in Cairo, the European Command in Stuttgart, Germany, NATO Command in Mons, Belgium. So as a planner, I dealt with foreign relations all the time. For instance, while I was in NATO, I was actually coordinating with 37 nations to actually build the force to go into the various civil wars in Bosnia. And so foreign affairs is very important to me. I serve on 2 subcommittees on the Foreign Affairs Committee in Congress. I'm on the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee, which basically deals with the southern border. And I'm on the European Subcommittee, which deals with Ukraine and everything that's happening in Europe. So 2 really good committees for me. And so my time in the military was more than development for my views in Congress. I don't think we've had a long period of relative peace, even considering the forever wars in the Middle East. We've had a long time of relative peace, and since 1991, there for a while, democracy was gaining momentum. Well, we don't think it is anymore, but during that period, it's back when we had exerted some influence in the world, which I think our influence is diminishing today.
So let me circle back on that. You talked about the second issue you're concerned with is the southern border.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
A couple of horrifying facts.
Okay.
We now know, and it's not classified, well over 100,000 Chinese military-age males are in the United States. You do not get out of communist China without them knowing it. These are not people that are boat people coming out of China. That's concerning. Well over 100,000. We now know that we have probably 11 million have crossed the border since this administration took office. We know that many of them, and a lot of people like to think they're Central America or South American coming across the border. Not so. We've got like 120 countries that have come across the southern border in the last few years. We see the criminal element rising with the crimes that you've heard about in the United States. I am far more concerned about a major attack in the interior of the United States by people who have evil intentions against the United States. This is an existential threat to our republic. because we also know that illegal immigrants are voting in all 50 states. And there are estimates that 3% of the vote may be illegal aliens. Well, if you've got a close race, 3% in any particular race might swing the race. This is a concern. Now, 14 states have tightened up their election law. But we're still worried about the big five that we heard about in the 2020 election, the Arizona, Pennsylvania, and all, so forth and so on. We're still concerned about that. So the open border has got three elements to it. One, just the number of people. Two is the sex trafficking. People don't understand how it's everywhere. And three is the fentanyl and the drugs coming across the border.
Okay.
So those are the elements that we see coming across the border. In fact, the fentanyl pills are no longer manufactured in China. The precursor chemicals come out of China into Mexico, where they're pressed into the pills and come across the border. So they've actually moved the production forward, closer to their consumers.
Yeah.
So the open border, we need to understand, is a existential threat to our republic. It just is.
So what's the solution there? You know, we've talked about a wall. Does that really solve the problem? What do we need to do to actually fix that threat?
Well, first of all, walls work. I'll just set that aside.
Okay.
In Israel, after the second Intifada, they built a wall. It's along a highway right there in Israel. You can see it. Towers above you. Walls work. Let's set that aside. It's policy driven. The policy of this administration is an open border. You go down and talk to the Border Patrol agents. They are basically processing illegal immigrants into the interior of the United States. They have 72 hours to turn a person over to either ICE or an NGO for transport into the interior of the United States. An illegal immigrant comes across the border with no papers. They ask him what his name is. He can make up any name. And that's his name from then on, because that goes on the paper. They ask them, where do you want to go? Chicago, New York, Dallas, wherever. And that's where they will send them. Those are facts that are just astounding to me.
Yeah, hard to believe.
Because if a man chooses the name John Smith, as vanilla flavored name as you can get, he's going to disappear into the millions of John Smiths in the United States. So.
Yeah. What do you say to people that have the opposite argument of really, you know, that we need immigrants because they're building our houses, they're doing the work that Americans don't want to do, and the line is too long to get here legally?
You have mentioned both illegal and legal immigration. Legal immigration needs reform.
Okay. The
problem is there's no appetite in Congress until we solve illegal immigration. So we need to get a handle on that. They're right. We have immigrants of all stripes doing jobs that Americans don't want. First thing I would do is make sure that we're not paying Americans enough not to work. During COVID, that became the standard.
Absolutely.
I was at Encore Wire in McKinney this morning, and they were telling me that they had people during COVID, they told them, hang on to my job. I'm coming back, but I'm going to go home so I can get the COVID money. I'll be back to work for you. And they did. They came back to work. Now, that was astounding to me, that people would say, save my job while I go get the government handout. I'll be back. First of all, we've got to stop paying people not to work. We need to get the American workforce back. Why do we have the unemployment they crow about as being low? But look at the employment, the total employment number. It's also low. We've got people that are not working. We need to get able-bodied people off of disability, off of COVID money, get them back into the workforce. That's the first thing. Then we do need to reform legal immigration, because you're right. We're not making enough babies today. Many countries are not. Japan is declining the fastest in the world. China, though, our big adversary today, is going to lose, the estimates are they will lose half of their population between now and 2075. Lose half.
Wow.
Lose half.
Yeah, changing birth
That's amazing.
rates. Right.
Yeah. We need. So we have to have a workforce. Great nations have great populations. Yes, we need immigrants to come in. We need them to come in legally, though, so that they can legally work and do the jobs that we need them to do. Absolutely, don't disagree at all.
Yeah. So I've always said it's really difficult to think about maybe even just you and I. Let's solve all these problems together and we'll get on the same page. And maybe we have differences in opinion on how to do that. So when we think of Congress, I always say you put 200 attorneys in a room, or how are they supposed to really get work done when maybe there's so many different opinions? How hard is that? How difficult is it? I mean, I think it's difficult. You're there in the middle of it. Is that what you've experienced so far?
They're not different opinions. They're two different worldviews. The worldview on the left, across the aisle from me, is that government should be absolutely autonomous and sovereign.
Okay.
The view on our side is that you have rights endowed by your creator that government should not trample on. That's the different worldviews that I see in Congress. Limited government, personal responsibility, personal freedoms that are guaranteed to us in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights mean nothing to the people across the aisle. They want government to be absolutely sovereign. So we're not talking about different opinions. We're talking about two different worldviews. How in the world do you reconcile two different worldviews? So now we see the results of the worldview across the aisle being expressed all across America, in our schools, in our government agencies. We know the IRS targeted certain organizations. We know the FBI abused the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act with over 100,000 improper warrants. We know that happens. We know that the two-tiered justice system is on full view today. How do we reconcile that?
Yeah.
We need to get people who share this view of limited government, personal responsibility. All of the creator-endowed rights are not to be trampled on. We need to get them to be in charge.
Come from the top.
Absolutely. Everything comes from the top.
Yeah.
It is a leadership principle. The leader sets the culture. We're not talking about just laws or policies. We're talking about culture. Comes from the top. And that's what we're seeing in full view today.
Yeah. How important is it that maybe our next president would have a view that can reconcile or work through two different sides that are so polarized? Is that possible, that you could have a leader that can then help both sides come up with a solution regardless of that belief?
I think that reconciliation that you're talking about will come from the bottom up.
Okay. Because
when you look at the Black polling numbers today, when you look at the Hispanic polling numbers today, they see the destruction of America, of American families, of American schools, of American cities. They see the destruction that's happening. So I think that change will come from the bottom up, not from the top down. The leader sets the culture, but I think the only reconciliation will become when people see the destruction that is being wrought on America today. And so the voting numbers you see, but also just people saying, we can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
We have got to have a change.
We need change.
Because I think the majority of our citizens still believe in safe streets. They still believe in citizenship, which a lot of people on the left do not. That's what open borders mean. Being a citizen of America means very little to some of these people. So I think that change will come from the bottom up.
Yeah, that's interesting. Interesting perspective. And ultimately, you're saying democracy will solve this.
We have to have a culture change. We have to have a sea change. We have to go back to the fact that this country was built as a shining city on a hill, where rights are respected. Just because I disagree with you doesn't mean you have to change your view. We can honestly disagree on something. if I don't want you to buy a gun and you want to buy a gun, I don't force you not to buy a gun, as an example.
Yeah.
We can disagree on things without being destructive to each other. But yeah, democracy and freedom, I think, or I think people, once they experience them, they kind of like freedom.
Yeah.
They kind of like, now, I think part of the problem is that, and I think it was Francis Schaeffer that 50 years ago wrote that if you did two things, if you left personal freedom, in other words, you could go to the grocery store, you could go to soccer games, you could go to church, personal freedom at that level, and personal affluence. You didn't touch somebody's savings or salary, then people would accept a tyrant. And people have said all along that tyrants come when people want security. They don't have security, they'll accept a tyrant. We see chaos in many cities across America today, and I think those people are asking for stability and safety.
So if we kind of circle back to why did you decide to become a congressman and make that kind of leap into the political world? What was it that was the catalyst to make you decide to basically come out of retirement and spend a lot more time, obviously not retired, but now have a really, packed calendar, very busy. What was it that really prompted you to become a congressman?
Well, a group of people came to me and asked me to make this run. But the more I looked at it, the more and I was probably a little distracted in my 3 years of retirement. But the more I looked at it, I realized we have a republic to save. And I think the next few years will be very crucial in whether this constitutional republic survives or not. And like I tell people, this is my last job. I have nothing to want in the future. This is my last job. I will do what I can to help save this republic. And I think that we have got to get back to that shining city on a hill where everyone is valued, life is valued, the rights that are enumerated in the Bill of Rights, the 5 in the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, on down through all of them, are vitally important to a safe, stable, prosperous, secure society. And if there's a saying that if we don't have some sort of civic conscience, we can't hire enough police. There must be some self-governing conscience in our civic society. And that's what I'm working toward.
That's great. Well, I appreciate your service, appreciate your contributions as a congressman, and think you're the right guy for the job. What about when you kind of reflect back on just maybe advice for the next generation? When you think of all these values, duty, country, other values that you have, like leadership, what do you think are the defining values that you would maybe emphasize for the next generation?
Faith. This country was based on the Christian faith. I think if you want to be successful in life, there's a few top level ideas. Go to a church, synagogue, whatever your faith is. Exercise it. Get married. Stay married. Find a career. I didn't say anything about college. I said find a career. Trades pay as much starting salary and sometimes more as college graduates. Find a career. Those are the things that I would mention. If we want to have a successful, stable, free society, those are the things I would start with.
Yeah, so you mentioned how important it is to get married, stay married. Obviously, that's a very important value for you. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, we were married 3 days after graduation from West Point. So we don't have children, which is a big part of the story because my wife did very well on one medicine, and the doctor said that he would not continue with the next step. This is back in the dark ages of reproductive health. But he said he would not continue unless we agreed to abort down to no more than 3. She could have carried 6. No one had carried 6 then. So we said no. So we still we don't have children or grandchildren. So that's a big part of it. So she's gone with me on every assignment overseas, wherever, except for deployments into combat zones, of course. So we do have young ladies that are very meaningful to us. But that's part of our story. And Tracy was a wonderful military wife for 25 years. She says often, you bloom where you're planted. And so she found ways to contribute to the community wherever we were. She made a home wherever we were. And we moved so many times that I would tell people, home is where Tracy is. I don't have a place. I have wherever Tracy is home. So she travels with me to Washington, D.C., which is important. So that's an important part of our lives together. I think probably meaningful to me, and I hope others, is my wife back when she was talking with younger women. At the time, the rage was compatibility. You want somebody that's compatible with you. And Tracy would tell them, you don't want somebody that's compatible with you. You want somebody that's committed to you. And she said it's a different C word. Mm-hmm. To me, Tracy has always been the anchor. While I've been out gallivanting and adventures and so forth and so on, she's been the homemaker, as wives tend to be, the homemaker and the one that provided me for the stable home while I was around.
So what advice do you have for maybe somebody that's just graduating or graduating college, wanting to go maybe that path of joining the military or a political career? What advice would you have for that next generation?
2 different advices. If they're going into the military, make sure you've got a good foundation, because the military today is a tough place for honorable service, because it has a lot of policies that demand more. The DEI policies, for instance, the wokeness that we see in the military today. But I personally, as a congressman, want to send the best and the brightest, for example, to the service academies. And I hear from people that say, I don't want my child to go into the military today because of what I see there. And I tell them, I want to send the best and the brightest to service academies, and it applies to joining the military, because we're going in harm's way again. I don't know when, I don't know where, but I want them to have the best leadership they can. And personally, if you're going to join the military, make sure you've got a good foundation before you go in, because it's a tough place to be a person of honor today. So that's for the military.
And when you say foundation, what does that mean? Family support, values?
Know who you are.
Okay.
Know who you are, because we're sending 17, 18-year-olds into the military. We ask a lot of them, but they need to know who they are so that they don't get drawn off by the distractions in the military. I could tell you, I was a young officer back in the days where we had a lot of drug problems in the 82nd Airborne Division, and we cleaned them up. But you kind of need to know who you are before you go in the military.
Okay.
Now, for politics, I will tell you, I recommend people get a job before they go into politics. Get some real life experiences before you go to D.C. Now, not everybody takes that advice, because a lot of people want to go to D.C. immediately and become a part of the Hill. But I tell them to go get real life experiences first.
Yeah, you can represent others a lot better if you have that experience, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, rather than politics, because politics is so insular, it's so isolated. The Hill is a little bubble in and of itself.
Yeah.
So go get some real life experiences, so you don't just get sucked into here and you don't even know what's going on out in the real world, because it's different.
Yeah. And what message would you have for your constituents and the listeners that you would like to deliver directly?
Look, I represent a great district, a very conservative district. The people there help each other. Look at the example of the last week. We had a tornado go through a neighborhood up in the northern part of Collin County. Neighbors helping neighbors was the immediate results. One story, a family was, their house was totally destroyed. It looked like a pile of rubble. They were underneath the stairwell, buried in this pile of rubble. The neighbors dug them out, passed the children out one after another, and then dug the parents out. So that's the district. I have promised them that I will be a voice and a vote for their interest. And that's what I intend to do in Congress.
Obviously, you've lived your life of service, being very useful. We're glad that you represent us, and I appreciate your contributions.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for being here.